Good morning. Today I'd like to talk about public history and the effect of narrative on our view of the American Revolution. But to do that, I first want to talk about a quote that is generally attributed to Winston Churchill, which is, "History shall be kind to me, for I intend to write it." What's interesting is that quote is completely fake. What he actually said in the House of Commons on January of 1948 was a response to a speech by Herbert Morrison, the Labour Lord Privy Seal, which attacked the conservative foreign policy before the war. Churchill said, "For my part, I consider that it will be found much better by all parties to leave the past to history, especially as I propose to write that history myself." Unquote. So what I find incredibly interesting is everyone seems to know that quote that was attributed to Churchill that he never actually said, and kind of weave that into our narratives of history, but that quote itself is fake. So after the American Revolution, public history in the United States was focused on the narrative of supporting the current political class that was in power, people such as George Washington. We can see if we look into stories such as George Washington and the Cherry Tree, Molly Pitcher, Betsy Ross, who at most produced some American naval flags, but never a flag for George Washington. That story is most likely a fabrication made up by her descendants. Nevertheless, her house is still preserved as a museum that you can visit. Now, why did the founding generation want to hide the history of the American Revolution behind a veil of kind of banal feel-good stories? That's because the American Revolution was incredibly destructive. It was, in effect, a civil war. And it pitted families against families, brothers against brothers. The story of Jane McRae kind of illustrates this. One of her brothers fought on the side of the American patriots. Her fiance, on the other hand, was a loyalist officer. And when we look at especially the Southern campaign, we can kind of see how terrible this war was. Farms were burned and looted, mostly just sometimes to fund, as Colonel Sumter found, he funded his force by stealing slaves from loyalists. Now, after that war, the founders knew that they needed at least some of the loyalists to stay and help build a true country. If they tried to build a country just with the revolutionaries, there wouldn't have been enough people and enough skilled tradesmen to actually really make a go of it. So there had to be some forgiveness offered after the war. And I believe that many of the stories that we focused on, especially in the early republic, were about allowing former loyalists to feel like they could be part of this new American republic. So what these stories did, first they focused on things like George Washington and his honesty, the Cherry Tree. They also focused on people like Paul Revere. They focused on, though I do understand Paul Revere was a little bit later, that he became a part of public history. But they focused on the evil British, not so much the evil Tories, the evil loyalists, because they knew it was a very important factor to bring us together and to create a narrative of us versus the British, not us versus us as well as the British. What I really find incredibly interesting is the most recent shift in public history and narrative that seems to be supporting a new ruling class that looks to downplay the founding generation. It looks to take down their monuments. This new public history is very focused on cutting anyone out that was in any way affiliated with the slave trade or a slave owner. But the alternative narratives this new public history wants to offer, to me, ring very hollow. They are not inspiring. They usually seem to pull people from that were newly found in the 1970s period, where historians were trying to focus on the common people and the common man. But these people were common people for a reason. They didn't do anything in their life that inspired their fellow citizens. So you can put up monuments to them, but they were people that were kind of ordinary Joes and never left anything inspiring behind, or any inspiring primary sources, the way that Thomas Jefferson or Ben Franklin or George Washington left behind. So that's kind of my thoughts on the public history of the American Revolution. I really have a problem with these new ideas, especially the French postmodernist idea that everything is narrative and there is no truth, that seems to be creeping its way into history. To my mind, if we have primary source documentation from multiple sources, that's going to create a version of truth that I can accept, versus just cherry picking from primary sources to create a narrative. So thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video, and I really hope that you guys enjoyed it.